big idea. New England's economy depended mostly on resources found in the ocean and in the forests. Vocabulary: industry, export, import, triangular trade route, naval store. Fast fact: in 1 year during the peak of colonial whaling, at least 350 whale-hunting ships sailed from colonial ports. As time passed, life in New England became less difficult. Many people, especially those who lived in the coastal towns, had to struggle less to make a living. By the 1700s, the great-grandchildren of the early colonists lived much more comfortable lives. This prosperity, or economic success, was based mainly on the sea and the region's dense forests. Many colonists in New England had built successful fishing, whaling, trading, and shipbuilding industries. An industry includes all the businesses that make one kind of product or provide one kind of service. Fishing and whaling. Many coastal towns in New England colonies prospered because of good fishing in the ocean waters. Because New Englanders could catch more fish than they needed, they had a surplus. The surplus catch could be dried and then sold or traded to people in Europe or to other English colonists in the West Indies. The town of New Bedford in Massachusetts prospered in the 1700s because some of its settlers began catching whales in addition to hunting. Colonial whalers used methods brought from England. They launched small rowboats from beaches and hunted for whales in the waters not far from the shore. Once they captured a whale, they killed it and towed it to shore. The whalers then cut up and boiled the whale's blubber, or fat, to obtain oil. Oil made from whale blubber was very popular at that time because it burned brightly without an unpleasant odor. One lamp filled with burning whale oil gave as much light as, and much less smoke than, 3 candles. So many New England whalers hunted close to shore that, after a while, the number of whales in those waters started to decline. As a result, the New England whalers began hunting in bigger ships and sailed farther out into the ocean. As the years passed, whaling trips became longer and longer. Some whaling ships left their home ports on ocean voyages that lasted for several months or even years. Review: what industries helped New England coastal towns prosper? Trading. In addition to fishing and whaling, many New England fortunes were made in trade. Ships owned by New England merchants carried trade goods to and from ports in the Caribbean, Southern Europe, and England. Many ships owned by the colonial merchants followed a direct trade route between the New England ports and England. They followed this route because the English government insisted. It wanted the colonists to send their exports, or goods leaving the country, only to England or to other English colonies. The English government also expected the colonists to buy only English-made imports, or goods brought into a country. Along this direct trade route, colonial ships from ports such as Boston and New Haven in Connecticut and Newport in Rhode Island carried exports of furs, lumber, and dried fish to England. The ships returned to the colonies with imports of tea and spices, as well as manufactured goods such as buttons, cloth, and shoes. Other New England trading ships followed what came to be known as triangular trade routes. These routes connected England, the English colonies in North America, and the west coast of Africa. They formed great imaginary triangles on the Atlantic Ocean. Trading ships carried goods from England and raw materials from the English colonies and the West Indies. Slave ships also carried enslaved people from Central and Western Africa. These people were used as workers in the English colonies. During this time, millions of enslaved Africans were forced to voyage across the Atlantic Ocean. The voyage across the Atlantic Ocean from Africa to the West Indies came to be known as the Middle Passage. The Africans suffered greatly on the slave ships. Many of them died during the Middle Passage. Their long voyage in overcrowded ships with cramped quarters was part of a large and cruel slave trade business. During the 1700s, some of the people in the colonies became alarmed by the cruelty of the slave trade. Later, some of the New England colonists began to form groups that worked to end slavery. Review: what were the triangular trade routes? Shipbuilding. Fishing, whaling, and trading encouraged the shipbuilding industry in New England. The forests of New England provided the raw materials needed for building ships in colonial times. Logs cut in inland forests were floated down rivers to the coastal towns. There, skilled craft workers used the logs to produce naval stores, the products that were used to build and repair ships. Workers used oak trees to make planks, or thick boards, for shaping ships' hulls. They used tall pines to make the masts. Pine trees also provided tar and turpentine to make pitch, a coating that is used to seal the wood and to help make a ship watertight. Workers called coopers used wood to make barrels and casks. A cooper was a regular member of a merchant ship's crew. It was the cooper's responsibility to put together and repair barrels and casks for the long ocean voyages. Merchants used barrels to store grain, dried fish, salted meats, and other foods they traded. Casks held molasses, whale oil, and other liquids. By the late 1700s, nearly one-third of all the ships sailing under the English flag were built in the New England colonies. One reason was the low cost of building ships there. Ships that were built in New England cost merchants only half of what they might have to pay for them in Europe. The shipbuilding industry contributed greatly to the growth and prosperity of many coastal towns in the New England colonies. Some of these towns became cities. By 1750, more than 15,000 people lived in Boston. It was one of the largest cities in the North American colonies.